Good morning, everyone. Happy Friday morning to you. Welcome back to Morning Musings. My name is Don K. Preston. I'm the president of Preterist Research Institute of Ardenwood, Oklahoma. You can probably tell I'm struggling with my voice a little bit again. I don't really know what the problem is now. My allergies have been raging over the last few days. But it's almost like I've been drinking caffeine coffee again. I have to confess, a really good friend of mine bought me a pound of Kona coffee, caffeinated, and I drank it all. So, yeah, that may be related to it. Oh, but boy, it was good. Okay. Pardon me. I'll do the very best that I can. All right. We're continuing our review. Now, we just finished a review of the book, The Future of Rome, specifically chapter 11, written by a scholar by the name of Peter Oakes, in which he takes a position that Babylon of Revelation is the city of Rome. It cannot be the city of Jerusalem. Andrew Perriman, who is a scholar that I really appreciate, by the way, I have said that earlier, and I mean that very sincerely. I really enjoy his writings. Some years ago, he wrote an article on the internet. I believe it's 2015, if I'm not mistaken, somewhere along in there. Somewhere along in there. Anyway, and it is entitled 20 Reasons for Thinking That Babylon the Great is Rome and not Jerusalem. Well, I certainly take issue with that. And let me point out again, Mr. Perriman and I had correspondence over this issue some years ago. We were down near the close of that correspondence when my computer did a major crash. I lost everything on it, and I was without my computer for almost a month. So it probably appeared that I dropped out of that conversation, but it wasn't that at all. So anyway, what I'm doing is going over the 20 reasons, and I'm conflating some of the reasons together. But there's some of them that are independently presented, sufficiently so that I cannot conflate them with other particular points. Pardon me. So one of the reasons that Mr. Perriman gives for believing that Babylon was Rome is his point number 2. It is, that is, Revelation, is an integral part of Daniel's Son of Man vision that the powerful kingdom that oppressed Israel would be judged and destroyed. Daniel chapter 7, verse 11, with dominion being given instead to the people of the saints on high. Now, this particular point impinges on and is related to the very first point, and that is his comment that what we find in the Bible is that the Bible presents the idea not only of the judgment of Jerusalem, but it also presents the idea of the judgment of the pagan nations. Well, last video I shared with you that in the New Testament especially, and actually this goes even to the Old Testament, and that is that the New Testament writers especially presented Old Covenant Israel as the pagan nation guilty of persecuting the church, the true Israel. And as a result of that, it would be Israel that would be destroyed, i.e. Jerusalem, not the actual pagan nations. That's a critical area. And this is not, that concept is absolutely not a preterist construct or invention. Scholars such as N.T. Wright, R.T. France, Scott McKnight, to name a few, they all take this position. Even John MacArthur stated that Jerusalem of Jesus' day had become the same as a pagan nation to be destroyed. Okay? My point exactly. So, on the second point, this touches that argument. It's not precisely the same, so I want to expand on this particular argument. Let me read it again. It is an integral part of Daniel's Son of Man vision that the powerful kingdom that oppressed Israel would be judged and destroyed, with dominion being given instead to the people of the saints of the Most High. Well, I agree in principle. I agree in principle with what he has to say. It certainly is, the book of Revelation certainly is based upon, draws from Daniel chapter 7 extensively. What's being done here, however, is that Mr. Perriman is assuming that the persecutor of Daniel chapter 7, the little horn that arises, and the fourth empire is itself Rome. Now, I agree that the fourth empire was Rome. I do have a difference with Mr. Perriman on the little horn. The little horn is seen as the persecutor, not the fourth empire. Distinct difference in Daniel chapter 7. The little horn arises in the days of that fourth empire, i.e. Rome. It is the little horn that persecutes the church. Now, interestingly enough, Mr. Perriman takes the view that the vision of Daniel chapter 7, 13 and 14, I saw in a night vision the one like unto the Son of Man, and he came before the Ancient of Days, and there was given unto him a kingdom which shall never be destroyed, over every kindred, tongue, tribe, and nation. Okay, so Mr. Perriman is assuming that this is the ascension of Christ in Acts chapter 1. Well, there's a problem with this. Point number one, let me reiterate again, the little horn arises in the days of the fourth beast. It is not the fourth beast. The little horn and the beast are two separate entities, and that has to be kept in mind. It is the little horn that persecutes the saints and wears them out. Well, that really becomes troublesome when you make the little beast apply even to Nero, because his persecution only lasted for 4 years. It's particularly troublesome if you try to make the little horn to be Domitian, because more and more scholars are understanding Domitian didn't ever actually persecute the church, and he certainly did not do so in any kind of a systematic way. Richard Niewanger, a historian of about the first century, says there is virtually no evidence whatsoever that Domitian ever engaged in any kind of a systematic persecution of the church, or even any kind of persecution of the church, much less systematic. Peter Oakes, in the book that I've just mentioned at the beginning of this video, says it's really troublesome, it's bothersome, it's difficult to identify Rome as the persecutor that John had in mind in the book of Revelation, because we don't have any documentation, any verifiable proof of Roman persecution of the church until the time of Decius in 250 AD. Okay, and yet Revelation depicts this city, Babylon, as already holding a cup full of the blood of the martyrs and of the saints of Christ. Well, if the cup's already full, then how can it be speaking of a period of time 250 years off? Do you see the problem? Furthermore, in Daniel chapter 7, this coming of the Son of Man is the time of the judgment of the little horn. Now, how do I know this? Because in Daniel chapter 7, verse 15, we have the interpretation of the vision. By the way, it's of great interest. Andreas Stutz, who is a noted scholar, has written about Jesus' use of the term Son of Man, and I'll get more to this in a moment. But he says when Jesus uses the terminology of Daniel chapter 7 of the coming of the Son of Man on the clouds of heaven in great glory, etc., and to receive the kingdom, it is invariably in a context of judgment. Okay, so Jesus' application of Daniel 7, 13, and 14 of the coming of the Son of Man on the clouds of heaven is to apply it to his coming in judgment. Not to his ascension, but to his coming in judgment. And if anyone wants that quote from Andreas Stutz, just contact me and I'll be glad to give it to you. All right? Furthermore, as I mentioned a moment ago, the interpretation of the vision shows that the coming of the Son of Man is in reality the coming of the Son of Man as the Ancient of Days. The Septuagint renders it that way. The Old Greek Septuagint renders it that way. And numerous scholars acknowledge that. Elton Holland, with whom I've been having a written debate, exchange, correspondence on the Olivet Discourse, does a marvelous job of demonstrating that Daniel 7, 13, and 14 is not the ascension of Christ. Now, since the interpretation of the vision, the interpretation of Daniel 7, 13, and 14 has the Son of Man coming as the Ancient of Days and in the judgment of the little horn, then that means you cannot apply Daniel 7, 13, and 14 to the ascension of Christ. In other words, the interpretation of Daniel 7, 13, and 14 is found in Daniel 7, 15, and following. The interpretation of the vision is the coming of the Son of Man as the Ancient of Days in judgment of the little horn. So once again, that means the judgment of the little horn would take place at the coming of the Son of Man as the Ancient of Days in the judgment. That's not the ascension. To make Daniel 7, 13, and 14 to be a referent to the ascension, then you have to prove that the little horn was judged at Jesus' ascension to the Father. Where do you find that taught? And by the way, Craig Keener, in his marvelous comprehensive commentary on the book of Acts and discussing discussing the ascension of Christ, he said in the early church, they never referred to Daniel 7, 13, and 14 as the ascension. They never did that. They applied the ascension to Psalms 110. Set at my right hand until I make your enemies your footstool. So for all of those people who want to really rely on the patristic writers, Craig Keener points out, they do not apply Daniel 7, 13, and 14 to the ascension of Christ. They apply it to Christ's coming in judgment. Furthermore, and here's the critical thing, I agree 100% with Andrew Perriman that Revelation is drawing on Daniel 7. No question about it. Revelation chapter 14, I saw one like the Son of Man coming on the clouds. That's Daniel chapter 7, 13, and 14. But Revelation chapter 14 is the depiction of the coming of the Son of Man in judgment of the city Babylon, whose cup of sin was full for martyring the saints, just like the little horn of Daniel 7. So once again, here we have Daniel chapter 7 being applied in the book of Revelation to the judgment of Babylon. Now remember what I just shared with you about the difficulty of applying Babylon to Rome. The book of Revelation is the depiction of the judgment of the great persecutor of God's saints, with a long, bloody history of persecuting the saints. But that was not true if you take the late date of Revelation, 95, 98 AD, in the time of Domitian. He was not the great persecutor of the saints. And let me reiterate, as Peter Oakes said, this is really troublesome, since from Domitian onward, for almost 200 years, we have no record whatsoever of any kind of persecution of Christians. I know that Trajan and Pliny talked about persecuting Christians, but with great reluctance. The Christians were not outlawed at the time. There was no systematic persecution. And by the way, Peter Oakes is well aware of that. That's why he said that the only persecution, systematic persecution, of the saints didn't happen for 200 years in 250 AD under Decius. You see, folks, if you're going to apply Daniel chapter 7 to the time of Revelation, then you've got to be able to identify the little horn who is the great persecutor of the saints. Now, this raises the question, and I wrote a series of articles on this some time ago. They're posted on my website, entitled Jesus Before the Sanhedrin. If you want to see my take on it, as it were, let me recommend that you go there in the search bar, just look up Jesus Before the Sanhedrin. Here's why I think this is so important. Jesus, in standing before the Sanhedrin, who are accusing him of blasphemy, said, "Tell us plainly, are you the Christ, the Son of the living God?" And Jesus said, "It is as you say, and hereafter you will see the Son of Man coming on the clouds of heaven with power and great glory." The high priest immediately tore his clothes and said, "What further proof do we need? This man has spoken blasphemy." Now, why would he say that? Because he knew, based upon Psalms 104, that Yahweh is the cloud rider. Only God rides the clouds. Only God rides the clouds in judgment. And here is Jesus citing Daniel chapter 12. Daniel chapter 7, and applying it to himself coming in judgment of the Sanhedrin. Folks, that's Jesus's interpretation of Daniel chapter 7, his coming in judgment of the Sanhedrin for persecuting him. I mean, after all, they're going to kill him, right? Furthermore, in Matthew 16, starting with about verse 21, Jesus said, "The Son of Man is going to go up to Jerusalem, be betrayed, crucified, buried, and be raised the third day." And he warned his apostles, "If any man is going to come after me, he is going to have to take up his cross and come after me." And he warned them, "You're going to be hated of all men for my name's sake." But he promised in Matthew 16, 27 and 28, "The Son of Man," that's Daniel 7, "will come in the glory of the Father with his angels and shall reward every man according to his works." What's the context of it, ladies and gentlemen? The context is his martyrdom and the martyrdom of his apostles. There is no break in the discussion. Jesus is telling his apostles he is going to be vindicated. His martyrdom that he's just been describing is going to be vindicated when he was going to come in the glory of the Father. And he said, "Verily I say unto you, there are some standing here which shall not taste of death until they see the Son of Man coming in his kingdom." And boy, I tell you, commentators try to divide those two verses, and they say, well, verse 27, that's the end of time. Verse 28, that may be the day of Pentecost, or it may be his resurrection. Some even go so far as to say that may even be AD 70. Well, I'm telling you what, folks, there is no justification for that dichotomization. Verse 28 begins with the little Greek term, amin lego humin. That little term is used throughout the New Testament, mostly by Jesus, and it never breaks a subject. it never introduces a new subject. It invariably calls attention to what is about to be said that's going to emphasize what has just been said. In other words, verse 28 is emphasizing verse 27. So verse 27 is talking about the coming of the Son of Man in judgment in the glory of the Father. Verse 28 emphasizes it by saying, some standing here will not taste of death until they see the Son of Man coming. And see, so what these people do, the commentators do, they make verse 27, the coming of the Son of Man, one thing, and then they make the coming of the Son of Man in verse 28 a totally different, radically different event. They don't justify it, they just make the claim. I know, I used to make that claim. So we come down to the close this morning, and we ask this following question. In Jesus' predictions of his coming of the Son of Man on the clouds of heaven, what is the context almost invariably? The context almost invariably is persecution, followed by the promise of the coming of the Son of Man. In Matthew 10, 22 and 23, you're going to be hated by all men for my name's sake. They're going to chase you from city to city. But you will not go through all the cities of Israel, that is, fled through all the cities of Jerusalem or of Israel, before the Son of Man has come. Scholar after scholar after scholar understands this is Jesus predicting his coming as the Son of Man in judgment on their persecutors. Who were their persecutors? It wasn't the Romans. Matthew chapter 24. They're going to bring you before kings and before governors and before synagogues. I'm conflating Matthew 24 with Mark chapter 13 here. Give no thought to what you shall say in that hour. For the Holy Spirit will give you the words that you shall speak, and they will not be able to withstand the wisdom of the words which you speak. What does Jesus then promise? The coming of the Son of Man on the clouds of heaven with power and great glory. So here's the promise of persecution, followed by the promise of the coming of Christ as the Son of Man in judgment. Throughout the Gospels, the predictions of the coming of the Son of Man are in the context of the persecution of the saints and the promise of the vindication of their suffering. Look at chapter 18, Luke chapter 18 very quickly, and I'm running out of time here. Jesus told a parable about what's known as the importunate widow. She had been wronged by her adversary, and she kept coming to this unjust judge and saying, "Avenge me on my adversary." And finally, with her continual haranguing of the judge says, "Well, I don't fear God or man. But because this woman, with her constant coming to me, she's never going to let up, in other words, I will avenge her." And Jesus says, will not God avenge his elect? What? Avenge them for what? Well, the word avenge is always in the context of martyrdom, mistreatment. Will not God avenge the elect who cry out to him both day and night? Verily I say unto you, he will avenge them shortly, in takai. Nonetheless, when the Son of Man comes, will he even find faith on the earth? Persecution, coming of the Son of Man for vindication. Who are the persecutors? In every one of Jesus's predictions of the coming of the Son of Man on the clouds, referencing Daniel 7, just as Revelation references Daniel chapter 7 in the context of the vindication of the martyrs. It is a prediction of Jesus' coming in judgment of Jerusalem and Israel for shedding innocent blood. Final point. When Andrew Perriman makes the point that Revelation is drawing on Daniel 7, once again, that's absolutely correct. And let's not overlook this. You cannot take the judgment of the little horn outside of the days of the Roman Empire, because he arises in the days of the Fourth Empire, the Roman Empire, and he, that little horn, is destroyed in the days of the Roman Empire. Notice it's not the destruction of the Roman Empire, it's the little horn. So whatever you make the days of the little horn to be, it has to be Rome. Wherever you posit his destruction, for instance, if you posit Babylon as Rome, then you're claiming that Revelation is about the fall of Rome. But that's over 400 years away from the time that John wrote the book of Revelation, even if you take the late date. 476 AD, destruction of Rome. That violates, and this is interesting because Andrew Perriman understands, we must honor the temporal time statements of the imminence of the coming of the Son of Man in the book of Revelation. Well, I'm sorry, 400 years is not at hand. Coming soon, coming shortly, coming quickly. It is not, these things must shortly come to pass. So on the one hand, Mr. Perriman acknowledges the importance of time statements. On the other hand, he applies the book of Revelation to events outside of that imminent temporal context. Okay, out of time. Thanks so much for joining me on this morning musings. Be sure to join Mike Sullivan and me this evening as we continue our study of Deuteronomy 32 as the foundation for all New Testament eschatology. I'll see you then.